Hi friends, welcome to yet another video where I'm going to talk about a very interesting NLP pattern called the drop down through pattern. Now, this pattern is an extremely powerful pattern and effective pattern when you want to bust long-term emotional issues that people are going through. For example, depression. People go through depression for a long time and just don't know how to get out of it. Or shame, guilt, chronic anger, traumatic memories that are bothering them since a long time. You see, what happens is whenever an negative event happens in our world, we don't just feel bad about it and forget it. We actually keep thinking about it, and as we think about it, more negative thoughts build up and they lead to more negative emotions. And this process of thoughts, emotions keep building on themselves, eventually creating layers of negative emotions which eventually become very difficult to get rid of. This is one of the reasons why depression is an extremely difficult problem to get rid of for a lot of people. Same goes with chronic anger, traumatic events and memories that are very difficult for people to get rid of. For all such issues which are long-term, difficult to remove, stubborn emotional issues, the drop-down through pattern is an extremely effective pattern that you can use. Besides this, the drop-down through pattern is also an extremely effective pattern when you want to work on psychosomatic issues, those kind of behavioral issues which are coming from deep-rooted emotional disorders and problems. Tammering, for example, is an ideal case where drop-down through pattern has been found very effective for a lot of cases that I have handled. You can also use the drop-down through pattern as a supplement to other NLP techniques. Say for example, when you do change personal history. Now, change personal history or the re-imprint process is used to get rid of traumatic events and memories that are deep rooted in a person's mind. But sometimes if that traumatic event is extremely deep rooted and strong, then you might want to use the drop down through pattern first and then break that traumatic memory completely down and then use the re-imprint or the change personal history process. Now here I must caution you that the drop down through pattern is an advanced NLP pattern that I teach in my master practitioner workshops. So for knowing this pattern and using this pattern, you must be at least knowledgeable up to a practitioner level in NLP so as to understand and use this pattern. I repeat, do not use this pattern if you have no knowledge of NLP. This is an advanced pattern because you are dealing with layers of different emotions and thoughts and you are trying to work with them to bust them. So don't use this pattern by yourself if you don't have proper knowledge of NLP. Now friends, I have something very interesting as a bonus in this video. I'm going to actually at the end of this video show you an actual demonstration of how I have used the drop down through pattern with one of my clients in a workshop, and you will see how I have used the whole process and the result that the client got at the end of the process. So keep watching this video because you will actually see a live demonstration which you can learn from when you want to use this pattern. So with this, let me start with the pattern itself. The first step in the drop down through pattern is to ask the client to access their current emotion. For our example, let's say they are suffering from depression. So ask them to access that feeling of depression. Ask them to think about contexts and areas of life where they experience this feeling of depression very strongly. Now, once the client has accessed this feeling of depression, in our example, in your example, it could be some other feeling. Once the client has accessed that feeling, we use a narrative which asks them to drop down through that emotion. So typically I would say something like, now as you're experiencing this feeling of depression, imagine the floor underneath you can open up and you just drop down through this feeling of depression. What do you feel underneath this feeling of depression? Many times you might have to repeat this statement 3 or 4 times for the client to fully understand what you mean. So keep repeating as you drop down through this feeling of depression. What do you find underneath this feeling of depression? Now let's say the client would say, I feel anger. Oftentimes client would express another emotion underneath that surface emotion. In this case it could be anger. Once again we use the same narrative. Imagine the floor underneath this feeling of anger opens up and you drop down through this feeling of anger. What do you feel underneath this feeling of anger? Once again, repeat this statement few times so that the client can fully understand and access the feeling underneath that feeling of anger. Repeat the same process few more times. You might have to do it 3 times, 4 times, sometimes even 7 or 10 times. And each time that the client accesses another negative emotion, you keep repeating this process until you will reach a point where the client would say they don't feel anything. They feel blank. They feel like they are surrounded by a white light. They just don't feel anything. Now, this is a very critical point in the drop down through pattern. When the client expresses that they don't feel anything or they feel like there is nothing or a white light, it means you have reached the bottom of those layers of negative emotion. From this point on, you ask the client to visualize that there is a tunnel in front of them. And as they go through that tunnel, they will emerge on the other side and they will feel another emotion at the other end of the tunnel. So now you just tell the client, imagine there is a tunnel in front of you, and as you slide through this tunnel, you will reach the other side of the tunnel where you will feel a different emotion when you reach the other side. Now most clients will experience a positive emotion there. They might say, I feel very nice. And then you repeat the same process again, but this time you ask them to go one level above this emotion. So you tell the client, imagine you can now go one level above this nice feeling. What do you feel now? They will experience another emotion which is a little more positive than being nice. Maybe they will say, I feel happiness. Ask them to recall events from their life where they felt the same feeling of happiness. And as they recall those events, you just anchor them. Now I presume you know what anchoring is. We just lock that feeling of happiness there so that we can use that again later on. And we repeat the same process again and ask them to access a feeling above this feeling of happiness. So you tell them, now as you are feeling this feeling of happiness, as you bring all this happiness together, what do you feel which is one level above this feeling of happiness? What do you feel which is even more than and better than this feeling of happiness? And as they experience that feeling, note it down. They might say, I feel very joyous. Ask them to recall events from their life where they felt that way, that feeling of being extremely happy and joyous. And when they experience that feeling of joy, anchor it again, lock that feeling down. We have now reached another critical milestone in the drop down through pattern. Now we will start the reverse journey by firing those anchors. So now we fire the anchors, and as the client experiences that feeling of happiness and joy, mind you, this is just an example in our case, as they experience that feeling of joy, ask them to go back in the direction from where they started. And as they go through that tunnel and come out on the other side with that feeling of being blank or the white light, ask them to rush up, carrying that feeling of joy and happiness, and crash through each and every layer of all those negative emotions that they had expressed. And as they smash through and crash through all those negative emotions, they will reach the surface emotion from where the journey started, the feeling of depression, as in our example, and smash through that feeling, carrying this feeling of joy and happiness. And that's where the drop down through process ends. So friends, as I had promised in the beginning, we are now going to see a live demonstration of how I have used this drop down through pattern in one of my workshops with a participant, and you will see what result we got at the end of the process. So hope you learned a lot from this video and wish you all the very best as you try out this pattern. But be very careful when you try out for the first time. Thank you very much for watching the video. Have a nice day. Bye bye.